Okay, so new development for Orisha. A lot of them have been developed in the last year. There are some that are a bit older than that, but I wanted to take some time to talk about it because they might not have been really we haven't really made people aware of those development. Some of those development came to be in March last year, and for that reason, a lot of people were already busy in their greenhouses or in the field, so they might not have seen these new developments get available. So the first part of this webinar will be about this new software developments that we made at Orisha, starting with the alerts. So as of about a month ago, you can now get alerts by text messages. Before that, you had to get alerts via voice calls, and so it was an automated voice that would tell you what's the problem with the greenhouse, and it would just tell you like, hello, there is a problem with your multifunction box in greenhouse 1, for example, and that would be it. Now you can get you can get text message alerts. They will inform you or where the problem is, and it will give you sources for troubleshooting as well. So you can choose now in the preference menu in the farm page to get either voice calls or text messages. And along that, we added a few new preferences in the preferences, such as you can choose from metric or imperial unit systems, and time format, either 24 hours or 12 hours. And also the language, English or French. It's important to know that when you choose a preference, either a voice call or a text message, is good for everybody that's on the app or that has his phone number in there. So everybody will either get voice calls or text messages. The next, I just noticed I made a mistake. This is a logbook. Hold on a second. There you go. So the next new development that we made is the logbook. It's a great way to keep track of your plants, especially right now. It's really oriented towards tomatoes. So there are a lot of information that are made specifically for tomatoes, but it can be quite versatile as well. So you can use it for any plants in your greenhouse. So it is a free tool, independent from the automation that we do. It's a great way to keep tracks of your spendings, profitability, and yields for each crop. There is one greenhouse consultant that we work with a lot that says we are what we measure. So we think at Orisha it's a great way to make sure that your plants are getting you the best yields, are as profitable as possible, just to measure how they are doing. So in the logbook, there are a lot of things that you can save, such as the sales for per crop, the heating costs, labor costs, other kinds of costs, and then more oriented towards the health of the plant. You can save the yields in kilograms. Then you have the leaves per plant, fruits per plant, blossom height, and stem diameter. This is a tool that we keep working on. It's still in a beta stage. So if any of you have feedback on how we can make it better, we can make it simpler, we can make you want to use it more, feel free to just write to us or to give us a call and tell you what are your ideas. We'll be happy to talk about how we can implement them. So you can see in the logbook that each of the data can be entered weekly. So you can really keep track of how your plants are doing from week to week. Next new feature is the news page. The news page is a great way in the app to just keep being aware of what's new with Orisha. So, for example, you'll have a lot of our blog articles will be in there. We have Sarah now that works with us, and she makes great blog articles on a lot of different subjects, such as how to dehumidify your greenhouse, how to manage a greenhouse in the winter. And so all of these new blog articles will be in that page, and that will redirect you to our website. Another great thing about the news page is one of our promo that we have right now, which is our promo to refer a friend. So if you are a customer at Orisha, you have the power to give one of your friends a 20% discount on his Orisha purchase. And if he purchases for more than $4,000 Canadian, you receive a $200 cash for his purchase. If you're not already a customer at Orisha, you can find a friend that already has an Orisha and ask for a discount. A new addition also this year is the multi-controller. So the way that Orisha works is that typically you have a relay box that's in the greenhouse. In this relay box, you put all of your devices connected in there. So furnaces, positive pressure, HAFs, roll-ups, they'll all be connected in the relay box. And it will communicate with what we call the central controller. So the central controller is really like the brain of the system. It's the central controller that takes the decisions based on the sensors to turn on your devices. It will send the commands to the multifunction box. But as they are wireless, they have a limited range to communicate with each other. They usually have to be in a range of 250 feet. So if you have two greenhouses that are more than 250 feet apart, you might want to have two separate central controllers. And now in the app, it's possible to have two central controllers in the same app. So both of the central controller will have two or more central controllers will have their own farm names, and you can select them in a drop-down menu in the left menu. Another new thing this year is we have now an outdoor page, so you can see outdoor data, such as if you have a wind sensor, you can now see in the outdoor page the speed of the wind on the y-axis, and on the x-axis you have the time. So for each day you can see how the evolution of the speed of the wind, and the color represents the orientation of the wind. So the green here at the beginning of the day says that the wind came from the south, and by midnight it was coming from more of northeast. Still on the outdoor page, we have the solar intensity graph. So if you have a sun sensor, with this page, you can monitor what the sun intensity looks like on a day-to-day basis. Still on the outdoor page. So it is calculated in watts per square meter. And so you'll see what's the intensity like throughout the day. On the irrigation page, you have the accumulation. So with every data of intensity that you get, Orisha will calculate how much solar energy the greenhouse has gotten throughout the day. And so it will calculate the accumulation. And so it's calculated in joules per square centimeter. And what you can do with that is correlate the amount of light that your plants get to the amount of time that you would want to trigger an irrigation. So on a sunnier day, you would get more irrigation, and on a darker day, like on a really cloudy day, you would get less irrigation. To give you an idea, a really sunny day is about 2,800 joules, and a cloudy day, like February, kind of dark day, is about 700. So let's say that you want to trigger irrigations every 200 joules. On a really cloudy day, you'd have 3 irrigations, but on a really sunnier day, you'd get about 12 to 14 irrigations. So it's really a great way to correlate the amount of light that your plants get in the greenhouse to the amount of times that you want to irrigate them. New addition this year also, the automation of thermal and shading screens. So this is really fairly new. We launched this feature about a month or two ago. It is the other device in Orisha that uses our solar sensor. So you can trigger the deployment of shading screens or thermal screens with the sun sensor. The only thing you have to do once you've entered your screen in the Orisha device page is to create your shading program. And there's only one thing to do. It's just to enter a maximum solar intensity. And if the average of solar intensity in the last 20 minutes is higher than the threshold, Orisha will simply deploy the shading screen to make sure that your plants are not exposed to sunlight that's too intense. Another thing that will happen by default with those shading screens is that Orisha will deploy them at sunset, just making sure that by deploying the screens, it will reduce the amount of space that Orisha has to heat. So instead of heating the whole greenhouse, if you split it into the shading screen, it will just have to heat the bottom half. So you'll save a lot of money on just heating the greenhouse. And in the morning, Orisha will gradually retract the shading screen. It doesn't want to retract it too fast, because if it does, the cold air at the top of the greenhouse will go down, and it will cause the air on the lower part of the greenhouse to condense. It will increase the humidity, and that could bring some problems in the greenhouse. And so for that reason, Orisha will carefully retract the shading screen just to make sure that it will not affect the humidity too much in the greenhouse. And so just to make sure that it will keep the humidity at the perfect level in your greenhouse while it retracts the shading screen. And so just to create the optimal program for shade in Orisha, it takes about really 2 minutes. You just have to enter the thermal or shading screen in the app. All you have to do is to put tell Orisha which relay deploys the shading screen and which relay retracts it, and then how much time it takes to deploy and retract. And then you create your program just by entering the maximum solar intensity, and you're done. Orisha takes care of the rest. Another great feature this year that has been asked a lot to us is multi-stage heating. It is perfect for multi-stage furnaces if you have a furnace that has two different intensities, or for an electric and fossil fuel combo, which is something we start to see a lot in Quebec. A lot of people will start to heat their greenhouses with electricity, but they will always have a propane backup in case of an emergency or if the electric furnace does not provide enough heat for the greenhouse. So it's great to have an option where, for example, in the case of those heating stages here, so the stage one, what you do is you just have to check the devices that you want to be turned on in the first stage. So in that example, if we look here, we'll see that the H3 and the H4 are our electric heaters. So if Orisha sees that the greenhouse is getting too cold, it will start the stage one. So it will turn on the electric heater 1 and 2. And in the stage 2, if it thinks that the electric heaters are not good enough, it will switch to stage 2. And in that case, as the electric heaters are not checked, they will be turned off. And we will switch to the propane heating in that case. That's one of the options that can be done. If you have a multi-stage furnace, let's say a propane furnace, what you would want to do is probably just check your first stage, check the first stages of your furnace in stage 1 in the heating program or in the temperature program in Orisha. And then in the second stage, you still want to keep the first stage checked here and just add the second stage checked here. So each of these checkboxes, the H1, H2, H3, H4, represent a relay in the Orisha box that's connected to either a stage of a furnace or simply a device. And so when you check it, it just means that this relay will be turned on in the Orisha relay box, and it will activate either one of the relays of your furnace or just one furnace as a whole. And so, yeah, Orisha starts by stage 1, and if it sees it's not enough after a few minutes, it switches to stage 2, and you can have as many stages as you want, or as many, or if you have more than 4 devices, you can have more stages than that. It's important to know that if a device is not checked in a stage, it will turn off in that stage. That brings us to our heat pipes. So another new thing with Orisha is heat pipes. It's something that's getting more and more popular. It used to be something that you would see, in bigger greenhouses that made a lot of volume, but it's becoming more and more popular in smaller greenhouses as well. It's a great way to either heat your table or to heat your soil itself. And so a lot of times the way to manage those heat pipes is that there will be a valve that its opening and closing is time-based. It will take a specific time to open and a specific time to close. And so that opening and closing time is related to a percentage of opening. So the more you open it, the more hot water goes in your plumbing system that heats the greenhouse. So what Orisha control is that percentage. And still in the stages, in the temperature program, you can set up at what percentage you want a valve to open, a heat pipe to open for each stage. So in that example here, in our first stage, let's say that we have 1 heat pipe and 2 heaters. So our first stage would just be for the stage 1 to open the heat pipe at 50%. If that's not enough, Orisha will open it at stage 2 at 100%. And stage 3 is 100% for the heat pipe, and it will also turn on the heaters. So it is integrated into stages if you want to have something that's more gradual. But if you wanted them to open at 100%, you just don't have to worry about stages. And if Orisha feels like it should heat up the greenhouse, it will just open the heat pipes at 100%. Next is the misting. So it is something that we released around March last year. I just don't think it's really well known so far, so I'll take just a little bit of time to talk about this one. Misting, the hours start of start and end of each period may vary according to the sun. So the way that the program is made is that you see that there's sunrise and sunset here. So what you do is those hours will change every day because Orisha knows when the sun rises and the sun sets. And then each of the periods will be made based on the hours of sunrise and sunset. So in that case, I made a program where so we had a period here of 3 hours where we don't do misting at all. And then the second period starts 3 hours after sunrise. And so after 3 hours, we start misting according to certain parameters that we can set up ourselves. And so the way that it works basically is that what you want to tell Orisha is if it gets drier than a certain point, you want to start misting for a few minutes. And after that point of misting, you won't do misting again for another specific amount of time. So in that case, we're working with a humidity deficit, which works in grams per cubic meters. And the higher the number is, the drier the greenhouse is. So in that case, if it gets drier than 9 grams per cubic meter, we would mist for 2 minutes, and then we would not mist again for 45 minutes. And all of those parameters can be changed as you like. And then we can create a last period for the day where, let's say, we don't want to mist before a few hours before sunset because we don't want the greenhouse to be too humid when the sun is going to set. We could create a period in which, for example, 4 hours after sunset, we're going to stop to mist in the greenhouse. And so it's important to notice that in Orisha, there is a specific dehumidification program and a specific misting program. And so those two, they don't work together. So you can dehumidify at a specific humidity, and you can mist at a specific humidity. And the way to make sure that they won't fight with one another is just to make sure to create the right limits for every program. So when you mist for 2 minutes and after that you don't mist for 45 minutes, it's just a great way to make sure that you won't mist too much and that won't interfere with your dehumidification program. And now we talk about, dehumidification and misting, and it seems kind of counterintuitive to do a little bit of both, because if there's one working to go one way and there's one working to go the other way, so why would you want to do both? Well, there are pros and cons to each. If a greenhouse gets too humid, you might get problems such as white mold and things like that on tomatoes. That really thrives when you have a really humid environment. But on the other end, if the greenhouse gets too dry, you might attract, let's say, cucumber beetles or any other insects that really thrive in a dry environment. And those insects will attack your plants. So cucumber beetles get their name from the fact that they really like to eat up your cucumbers. And a great way to prevent them from coming in your greenhouse is just to maintain a good misting environment that will really restrain their movement. And so they won't be tempted to go in your greenhouse and just eat up all your cucumbers. Next is a CO2 sensor. It's something we added about a month ago. And so far, it's just for monitoring. So on a daily basis, you can get a graph like that that just shows you the amount of CO2 in your greenhouse in parts per million. And so you can see how the parts per million change throughout the day, and you can get back to the days before to see how it was also. And so for now, it's just for monitoring. When you add it, it's pretty much like adding a temperature and humidity sensor in the greenhouse. So the only thing that you have to do is the sensor is wireless. It's pretty much just a white box with a few little roofs on it for those who have already seen our temperature and humidity sensor. And under the sensor, there will be a sticker with a number on it that starts by 100. In our example here, we can see it's 106. And so the only thing you have to do to add it in Orisha is to go to the sensor page, go to CO2, and just add the address on the sticker, so 106. And as soon as you press enter, it takes about 10 seconds. And from there knows that sensor is in your greenhouse, and it can tell you the parts per million of CO2 for that specific greenhouse. And eventually in the future, we might want to add automation related to that. If you feel like that's something that you would want to have in your automation, just kind of CO2 automation, feel free to let us know. Send us an email after the webinar just to let us know if that's something that could interest you. We're always open to feedback from the community. Another thing that was asked a lot to us was the automatic selection of cloud cover conditions. So as of, well, since the beginning of Orisha, the only thing that we asked our clients to do on a regular basis was every morning to go in the app while they were drinking their coffee in the morning and just to select the right cloud cover conditions based on what was the weather forecast for that day. So, if the weather forecasted it was going to be sunny today, you had to click on this icon, and if it was cloudy, you had to click on this one, and so and so. The reason for that is that because in Orisha, you can make different temperature programs based on the sunlight. So for plants to have an optimal growth, you would want to have higher temperatures when it's sunny in the greenhouse and a lower temperature when it's cloudy in the greenhouse. Because if you give temperatures that are too high to plants on a cloudy day, they will grow in height instead of growing in strength and growing fruits. So you don't want your plants to get leggy. So you want to give the right temperature for your crops when it's sunny and cloudy. So you can tell Orisha what is the cloud cover condition by manually selecting that. But as of the new update, you'll be able to actually not have to do it. Now Orisha will do it itself. What it will do is it will fetch what is the cloud coverage for that day on the internet on a weather database, and it will choose what's the right scenario or what's the right cloud cover for that day. And so it will choose the right temperature program that you created for sunny or partly cloudy or cloudy. If you want, it's still possible to manually select the cloud cover condition by clicking that little action button here by just putting it off, and then you can select what's right for you. Another new thing coming soon in the app, it should be coming up in a few months or weeks. It's the selection of vigor. So one thing about plants is that you want to make sure that they have a good 24-hour temperature average. If it's either too low or too high, one thing that will happen is that it will be bad for their development. They might not bear as many fruits as they could, or they might not develop the right way. When the vigor is ideal, plants will make the best out of their resources. So every dollar that you're putting in your plants just to make it grow, so water, fertilizer, heat, light, it will make sure that the plant is using it as best as it can. And with the ideal vigor, you also get more fruits. And so just by having the vigor really balanced, so uh, just not too much or not enough, you'll just get more profitable plants. And so the growers can indicate what's the state of their plants on this little gradient here, so they can indicate if their plant is not enough or too high on the vigor state. And so based on what you'll say here, Orisha will adjust the 24-hour temperature, mean temperature, just to make sure to reestablish the plant to a balanced state. For troubleshooting, a great thing we added this year was the gray action button. So before in Orisha, when Orisha wanted to turn on or off a device, there were two states for the action buttons related to an object. It was either green to say it's on or red to say it's off. But there's another case that we added, just to tell you an idea of how Orisha works. There are two main devices that I was talking about earlier, which are our central controller, the brain of the system, and the relay box. And so usually the central controller sends its commands to the relay box, telling it, for example, turn the furnace on. And the relay box would answer to the central controller saying, yes, I have turned the furnace on. So in that case, if that's a success, you'll see the action button when it's off would be red, and if it's on would be green. So if it successfully turns from green to red or red to green, then it's a success. But if Orisha tries to turn on a furnace and the action button is gray, it means that the central controller tried to tell the relay box to turn it on, but did not get an answer back from the relay box. So Orisha was not able to turn on that furnace. So it's a good way to do a bit of troubleshooting. One thing that happened to me this year is that I had not this year, but this week, is that I had a customer call me because his furnaces were not turning on. I checked in his app, and the action button was gray. And so after looking around a little bit, since the action button was gray, it was evident that it was something regarding the relay box. It was not happening as it should. So I just asked him if his relay box was turned off, and it turned out that it was actually turned off because one of his employees had just put a ladder that was leaning on the power bar that was powering the relay box. And so when he found it out, just remove the ladder, turn back the relay box on, and everything was saved. And so, yeah, even if the action button turns to green, just meaning that Orisha did send a signal to turn on a device, it does not mean that the device has been turned on successfully, as Orisha has no control on your breakers and your electric box in the greenhouse. So if your breakers are off, Orisha doesn't know. And it also doesn't know, for example, if you still have propane in your propane tank. So what you can make sure is that if the action button is green or red, it means that the signal was sent to the device, but you always have to make sure, of course, that everything is in order to make sure that your device can actually be turned on. Hardware. So we changed a few things this year about the hardware. What we can see on the picture here are our old relay boxes. We call them multifunction units. There were two kinds of those. There were the ones with the switches on them and the one without. But basically, that box was 10 dry relays, meaning just relays that make contacts but that don't send currents. And there were two relays that were made for roll-ups. So they could either send current one way to make the roll-ups go up or down, up, and send the current the other way to make the roll-up go down. And so we decided to split that multifunction unit into two smaller units. So the first one is the side curtain unit. You can see my colleague Martin here skillfully assembling the multifunction, not the multifunction, but the roll-up unit. In that new unit, there are a few new things that can really help for troubleshooting. First one being that there are LEDs to tell the state of the relay. There are two of them. The first one is protection mode. So with protection mode, one thing that happens is that this light would turn on if the side curtain unit tried to either open or close your roll-ups, but it ended up forcing too much, and to prevent either your motor from breaking or the side curtain unit from breaking, it will enter protection mode just to make sure that it's not overdoing it. The other LED will indicate if there is no current going to the relay box. Another new thing with this side curtain unit is that it can operate roll-ups up to 250 feet. The previous one was 150. And before, in the previous box, there were a few that were kind of hard to find. We had to refer our customers to our own providers for those fuses. But now they have been replaced by car fuses, which are really easier to find for everybody. You can go to your, I only have Canadian tires in mind, but to the equivalent of that in the US, if you're in the US. And then the other box is the activation unit. So it's the one replacing all the relays that were either on or off in the multifunction box. A few new things for this one as well. There are also LEDs telling the state of the relay. So you have three LEDs. The first one just telling that the relay is on. The other one telling that the relay is in manual mode. So you can just manually in the box control the device with a switch. And so just if it's in manual mode, there will be a LED to tell you that. And there is also an LED telling you that there is no current that actually comes out of the relay. One other great thing is that now, I'll just get to this point first. There are switches directly in the box that allow you to manually turn on and off each device. Before, with the previous box, the only way with Orisha to turn on and off devices with Orisha was to go through the app and go with the action button that we saw earlier and just click it on and off in the app. Now the activation unit has physical switches for each relay that you can either put manually on, manually off, or just to let the AI manage the device. There's also the dry or wet. What I'm talking about is that the relays now can either provide 24-volt AC current or not provide current at all. It's great because the dry option, which doesn't provide current, implies that if the provide's coming from an external source, Orisha will just um, act like a contact. So just make a contact to turn on power coming from an external source. And if it's wet, it will mean that Orisha will provide current for the device. And so that will really make the installation easier for people, because before Orisha could, yes, I think I have a raised hand. Do I? Was in the chat? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I heard a sound. I think it was Music Lover. CO2 automation could be useful for indoor closed system growing operation. You're totally right. I hadn't seen your message before now. Music Lover, I'm curious, what's your setup? Do you have greenhouses or any indoor system growing or any indoor operation right now? All right, I'll get back to our presentation. So yeah, with the new activation unit, there is either a dry or wet state. So the wet state, what it does is just it provide currents. It was really useful for example, the valves. To give you an idea, with the previous relay box, here's what the wiring diagram looked like. So you had to have a power supply providing the 24 volts. It was your valve. You had to jump a few wires from the relays. It was really complex. And now this is what it looks like. So much easier. You take two wires coming out of the valve, and you take two wires coming out of the valve, and you just bring them directly to the relay box. And central controller. So before, if some of you have seen a central controller before, it just used to be a white box with a power cable coming out of it. We added a few improvements to it. So now you have the possibility to get an antenna in it. So the antenna can improve your range a lot. So right before the antenna, the range of the central controller was about 250 feet. You could also put your central controller a bit higher just to increase its range. Now, another way to increase the range is you can add this antenna right here. And if you want to put the antenna even higher to increase your range, you can do it so with a coaxial cable. So you can put the coaxial cable between the antenna and the central controller and bring the antenna even higher to increase your range. We also made the Ethernet connectivity a bit better. So before that, you had to run your Ethernet cable through the same cable gland as the power, which involved a lot of pushing. And so now we added a new cable gland with just an easier access to Ethernet connectivity. Even if you have an older central controller, you always could connect it with Ethernet cable. We just made it easier for the new ones coming. A little word about one of our great friends here at Orisha, our dry wet bulb sensor. It's something that came out about a year and a half ago. I just had a request from some meteorologists to talk about it a little bit more, so I'm just going to take one slide to talk about this one. It's a project that we created just to make a more efficient, more precise temperature and humidity sensor. The great thing about it is that well, first, it has an integrated fan, so that means that there are less chances of creating microclimates within the sensor. Our other sensor, which we'll call the electronic sensor, just has kind of a closed box with a sensor in it. So one thing that can happen on really sunny days that it can get kind of a microclimate building up inside the sensor. So this one, which with a fan in it, will just make sure that the air circulation is much better, and so Orisha will react faster to temperature changes. Another thing that's great about it also is that with the principle of dry bulbs and wet bulbs, it's a way that the way it works in the sensor, there are two temperature sensors, one that's dry and the other one is connected to a kind looks like a shoelace. It goes in a bottle of water, and the water just goes up the lace by capillarity, and so that makes the one of the bulbs wet. And there's something that happens with water when it evaporates. So so when there's water in contact with the wet bulb, and the evaporation of water just creates temperature. And so the drier the air, the more evaporation there is. And so Orisha calculates how humid the air is in the greenhouse just by comparing the temperature between the wet bulb and the dry bulb. So another great thing about this humidity rating, if you have to remember something about what I just said, is that it's really more precise, but also it's more durable. One of the problems with a lot of humidity sensor is that they get less precise with time, because the piece of hardware that's made to measure humidity will sometimes get saturated in humidity with longer times. So humidity will sit on it, and then that can just give the idea to the sensor that it's actually more humid than it actually is. But with this idea of just measuring the humidity with temperature, we get something that's really more durable. The only thing that's different with this sensor compared to a thermostat or another electronic sensor is that there's a monthly maintenance that you have to do. As I said, there's a water bottle in the sensor. You just have to fill it every month or so. And sometimes, since there's a fan, there's also a filter for the fan, just to make sure that there's not any. A greenhouse is kind of a dirty environment, so it's just you just have to wash the filter from time to time, just to make sure that the dirt in it is not gonna keep the air from coming in. Outside temperature and humidity sensor. That's one thing that was asked to us a lot as well. If you don't have a temperature and humidity sensor outside, what Orisha will do is it will fetch those information online, so on our weather database, just as it does for the cloud cover conditions. And so that's something that works great for a lot of people. But in some cases, you might want to have something that's a bit more precise. And so what you can do is just take pretty much exactly the same type of sensors that you have in a greenhouse. So either the electronic or dry wet bulb, and put one outside. And just by telling Orisha, there's a box. Okay, to keep the French picture, but there will be a box in which you can enter just the address of the outside temperature and humidity sensor. And once you enter the address of that sensor, Orisha will take the temperature and humidity given by that sensor to know what it is outside. So Orisha uses the temperature and humidity for a lot of things outside. First, when it knows that it's colder outside, it's going to be more careful about how it should cool down your greenhouse. So, for example, if it's quite cold outside, let's say it's about 5 degrees Celsius, or if it's about, I don't know, 45 Fahrenheit. If it thinks that the best thing it can do in that situation is, let's say, just to open your roll-ups, it might not open them as quick as when it's really hot outside. So on a colder day, it might open your roll-ups 5% by 5%, just opening them up really carefully, just making sure that there's just a little bit of air coming in to cool down your greenhouse, because it wouldn't want to open them up all the way, and then there's too much cold air coming in, and then it has to close and heat up. That would not be a really efficient and really cost-effective way of doing things. So it will just be careful when it's cold outside. But on hotter days now, when it knows it's hot outside, it will open your roll-ups much more quickly, because it knows that it can make the air come in, and that's not going to cool down the greenhouse too much and make you have to heat it up afterwards. So it's a good way to have a really good precise reading at your farm. And one thing that we encourage you to do is that if you want an outside temperature and humidity sensor, why not just buy the other dry wet bulb for inside your greenhouse and take the electronic one and bring it outside? Coming soon, you'll have my colleague Philip here looking at the future, a really optimistic man. So I'll show you things that are not right now in the app, but that they are subject to change. But these are our big projects for the future. First one is the cold crops program. So one thing that we've been really invested in the last year was winter growing. Winter growing has really different challenges than summer growing. A lot of the things that usually apply in the summer are completely different in the greenhouse. For example, I talked to you earlier about the cloud cover conditions. You might not want to have the same temperature when it's sunny, when it's cloudy. Well, that all goes out the window in the winter because every day is gray anyway, and every day is kind of there's not a lot of sunlight anyway, so you don't necessarily want different temperatures, and you usually even want the same target for night, morning, and day. People who used to do winter growing with Orisha, when they had to choose a temperature for night, morning, day, and for the three different cloud cover conditions, would usually just put the same targets in all of those settings. And so now with the cold crops program, all you have to do is you put one minimum, one maximum for any time at all, and Orisha will manage the temperature with that. And also, it's something that we want to do is to integrate not only temperature management for the that's going to be smart for winter, but also humidity management, because we know that winter growing is in a greenhouse does not have a great profit margins. So we want to make sure that your greenhouse is really managed the best way to reduce your costs of heating and dehumidification and increase your yields, just so to make sure that you'll get the most out of your winter crops. And when the winter is done, when you switch back to the summer program, I wish I will remember last year's summer program. It's just like a preset. Next, thermal camera. I have a colleague working pretty much full time on the thermal camera. It's something we want to add in Orisha. And when you take a photograph of a plant with a thermal camera, you're going to see what's the difference in temperature between the air in the greenhouse and what's the difference with the temperature of the plant. And that can give you a lot of really useful information on how the plant's doing. For example, it gives you information on its evapotranspiration. And so that gives you a lot of information on if the plant's healthy or not. And so based on what Orisha sees with that, what our plan is to just adjust the temperature and humidity in the greenhouse just to make sure that what the thermal camera will see will get better by adjusting a few parameters. It is still at R&D stage. If you have any ideas, feel free to let us know. It is also something that we want to bring up to smaller growers. It is something that already exists in bigger automation system for bigger greenhouses, but our plan here is really to democratize a technology that was only available so far to big greenhouses, and you want to make it available for small scale growers, just so that you have all the tools you need to be competitive, as efficient as possible, and as worry free as possible. Electric conductivity. This is such a project in its early stage. I don't even have a picture for this one. But the way it works basically is that what you'll do is just measure the electric conductivity in your soil. And that's a great way to know when you have to irrigate, when you have to fertigate. So fertilize and irrigate at the same time. It will give you a lot of useful information on what are the nutriments in your soil and how to fertilize your soil. Right now, we're getting to a first phase of monitoring only. So we'll measure the electric conductivity in the soil, and you'll have access to what the data is and to graphs that tell you ideas on it, so you can act upon it yourself. And eventually, we'll get to a point where we want to automate. In the meantime, as I said, since we're in our early stage, your feedback is much appreciated. To conclude, so we have two kind of big main topics for our new developments this year. First one being the software updates. So we have new automations like misting, shading, heat pipes, and all the associated programs that make it easy to have those devices working as best as possible. We have the new graphs, so everything that's outside, so wind, solar intensity, solar accumulation. We have the CO2, and we have vigor also that's coming up, just to help you make sure that your plant is as healthy as possible. And on the hardware side, we have the new relay boxes to make the installation easier, so less wiring to do, and it's way easier to understand how to set up your devices in the greenhouse. And we also have the new sensor, so the dry wet bulb, the CO2 sensor, we have the solar sensor, and all those new sensors are made just to make you have more control and more knowledge on what's going on in your greenhouse. And that's pretty much it for our presentation today. I'll take the questions if there are some. Yeah, I saw that Music Lover you wrote in our chat and Sarah answered. So yeah, going into my first season with 20 feet by 48 feet unheated mobile greenhouse. I'm doing research to decide if my next addition to my farm is a larger, more sophisticated greenhouse or an indoor LED lights hydroponics operation for growing greens. Seems like the Orisha system could work for either option. Yeah, actually, it is an option that could work for either of those. What we do for automating climate can be for a greenhouse, but we do have customers that do grow indoors. We just added a new customer that does hop inside of his greenhouses. So he's completely inside his in just basically indoor growing, and so it can, in that case, there's no interaction really with the outside, but it still works for us at Orisha. And if you want to do it in a greenhouse, it's always great to do so. Here at Orisha, we're always fan of if you have a building, we think it's best to just make the best out of that existing building before adding another one. But that's coming from an automation company guy, so you do you. But if you need help on anything, how should you automate or what should I plan to get to the next step, we're always available to help you with that. Did anybody else add any other questions that you'd want to answer, or any clarification on the new developments, any feedback? I'll just leave you just maybe 30 seconds, just if you want to unmute your mic or raise your hand at the bottom, the button at the bottom. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. And I will send an email in the next few days just with the recording of the presentation and with the PDF as well. So thank you all for your time and have a great weekend.